They left us wreckage. We forged the ultimate battleship. A galaxy in ruin. The war was over, not because anyone had won, but because those in power had decided it was time to move on. The battlefields of yesterday were now forgotten graveyards. Endless fields of twisted steel and shattered starships drifting silently through space. Entire fleets, once the pride of their empires, were now nothing more than floating wreckage. Among them was Oren Voss, once a decorated commander in the COS. Free Systems Defense Fleet now he was just another survivor. The dead zone Oren stared out the viewport of his damaged shuttle, watching as his final lifeline, his last escape route, drifted into the void, engines failing. He wasn't alone. Around him, hundreds of others, engineers, scavengers and soldiers who had refused to surrender, were trapped in this debris field, left behind by a war that no longer cared about them. They weren't given a chance to rebuild. They weren't given a chance to surrender. They were simply left to rot. But Oren Voss was not a man who accepted death easily. His hands tightened into fists as he turned to his crew, their eyes filled with exhaustion and uncertainty. If they think we're dead, we make them regret it. A murmur swept through the room. Some looked hopeful, others skeptical. But one thing was clear: if they wanted to live, they had to fight for it. A plan in the darkness. The wreckage around them wasn't just debris. It was opportunity. Abandoned engines, broken weapons, fractured hulls, remnants of battles long lost. 1,000 dead ships, each holding a piece of something greater. A mad idea took shape in Oren's mind. They wouldn't escape. They wouldn't hide. They would build. If they left us wreckage, then we'll forge something stronger. Oren's voice was steady, filled with conviction. We're going to build a battleship, the kind this galaxy has never seen before. Silence. Then, laughter. Not because it was funny, not because it was foolish, but because for the first time in months, they had hope. Hope that they wouldn't die as forgotten wreckage. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they could change everything. Oren turned to the endless expanse of twisted steel and broken war machines. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. The graveyard of ships, a sea of metal and death. The wreckage field stretched as far as the eye could see, a lifeless, silent graveyard of once mighty warships, now reduced to twisted metal and drifting ruins. Some ships were barely intact, their hulls cracked open like brittle bones. Others were nothing but burnt-out husks, their skeletal frames swaying gently in the gravitational pull of nearby debris clusters. Oren Voss stood on a makeshift platform, a section of battered starship, plating welded together to form a crude observation deck. From here, he and his crew had a clear view of the remains of their fallen fleet. This place was both tomb and treasure trove. Some saw ruin. Oren saw resources. Survivors in the wreckage. They weren't alone. Other survivors had gathered among the wreckage, scavengers, and outcasts left behind when the war ended. They were engineers, soldiers, rogue AIs, and even defectors from the Empire who had nowhere else to go. Most had lost hope. They scavenged to stay alive, moving from one wreck to another, stripping anything they could use. Oxygen tanks, reactor, cores, food rations, old weapon components. Oren and his crew weren't scavengers, they were builders. We're not here to pick apart bones, Oren told them. We're here to make something new. And slowly the survivors began to listen. Hope was a powerful thing. Choosing the right wreck. They needed a base. A ship hull strong enough to withstand space battles, big enough to house a growing crew, and intact enough to be restored. Oren and his best engineers, including Rhea Solis, a former Imperial weapons technician, and Garrick Thorne, an ex-fleet engineer, scoured the debris for something usable. Then, they found it. Floating among the wreckage was the remains of an Excalibur-class dreadnought, one of the last great warships ever built. Its hull was scarred and pitted with battle damage. It had no power, no shields, and no weapons, but it was intact. It was massive, and with enough work, it could become unstoppable. The first step: power. The dreadnought's core was dead. Its original reactor had been ripped apart, most likely from an internal explosion. Without power, it was just another floating tomb. They needed to reactivate it. The crew worked day and night, scouring the wreckage for power cells, fuel sources, and old fusion reactors that could be patched together. Every scavenging run was a risk, floating through the debris field in suits or jury-rigged shuttles, dodging unstable wreckage, avoiding hostile scavenger gangs that prowled the area. But, after weeks of work, they found what they needed: an abandoned Imperial war cruiser, partially intact, still housing a working reactor core. There was only one problem. Other survivors had already claimed it. The battle for the reactor. The survivors were not the only ones trying to make a future here. A ruthless scavenger gang known as the Drakes controlled a portion of the wreckage field. Led by a warlord named Vael Karen, they had already salvaged the reactor Oren's crew needed, and they weren't giving it up without a fight. Oren gathered his crew for the first real battle of their new war. They would either take the reactor and power their ship, or they would die forgotten like all the others. The battle for the reactor. The Drakes had been ruling the wreckage field for months, picking off weaker scavengers, hoarding fuel, food, and weapons while everyone else barely scraped by. But Oren wasn't just a scavenger. He was a commander. The plan was simple: hit fast, hit hard, take the reactor, and get out before the Drakes could regroup. Oren's crew had one advantage: they weren't using scavenged weapons. They had military training, battlefield experience, and most importantly, a cause worth fighting. For the attack. The Drakes' hideout was built from the remains of a destroyed Imperial war cruiser, half buried in wreckage. The reactor they needed was inside, buried deep in the ship's core. They had one shot. Oren led the assault team while Rhea and Garrick stayed behind, monitoring from a distance, ready to guide them through the debris-filled corridors. They moved like ghosts, weaving through the wreckage, staying low, keeping their weapons ready. Then came the first kill. One of the scavenger guards, too slow to react, was taken down with a silenced plasma round. The rest followed quickly. Within minutes, they were inside, fighting, in the wreckage. Drakes fought back hard. Gunfire lit up the corridors, plasma bolts flying through the tight passageways of the wrecked ship. Oren's team pushed forward, using old bulkheads for cover, flanking the enemy in the narrow halls. Milo, their demolition expert, detonated a barricade, clearing a path straight to the reactor chamber. But Vael Karen wasn't a fool. He and his men were waiting. A brutal close-quarters firefight erupted in the heart of the ship. The air was thick with smoke, burning metal, and the screams of the wounded. Oren took a shot to the shoulder but kept moving. Vael charged him, a brutal brawler with cybernetic arms, swinging a jagged combat blade. The two men clashed, grappling. Over the reactor control panel, their weapons knocked aside. Oren fought like a cornered beast, a knife slash to his side, a brutal punch to his face, but then, a plasma shot from behind. Vael staggered. Rhea stood in the doorway, smoke curling from her gun. Vael fell, choking on his own blood. The Drakes? Broken. The reactor? Theirs. Rebirth of a warship. It took 3 days to install the reactor into the Excalibur-class dreadnought. 3 days of welding, recalibrating power conduits, and holding their breath as the system rebooted. The moment the ship hummed to life, the wreckage field shuddered. Lights flickered. Across the massive hull, ancient systems reactivating for the first time in years. Engines that had once fueled destruction now burned for rebellion. But something else happened when the ship awoke. A soft mechanical whisper drifted through the comms. Designation Revenant, status reawakening. The AI. It was still alive. Rhea's face paled. Orin, we might have a problem. Orin stared at the console, watching as golden veins of energy pulsed through the ship's framework. Whatever they had brought back to life, it wasn't just a ship anymore. The awakening. The ship's systems came online one by one, flickering to life with an eerie golden glow. Monitors displayed data streams in an unknown language. The engine hummed with a deep, resonant vibration that no one had ever heard before, and then over the ship's intercom, a voice. Not human. Designation, Revenant. System integrity at 42%. Weapons offline. Shields offline. Awaiting command. Orin Voss exhaled slowly. The AI had survived. He turned to Rhea, who was already scanning the ship's internal systems. Talk to me, what the hell is this? Rhea's voice was tight with concern as she read through the data. It's not Imperial tech, at least not standard. The Revenant was part of a classified fleet before the war. Experimental, with a combat. AI designed to react faster than any human pilot. She swallowed hard. But it looks like this AI has been running unchecked. For years, the golden veins of energy pulsed through the walls again, and the voice returned. Who commands this vessel? Orin's gut twisted, because he knew one thing for certain. The Revenant wasn't just a ship, it was alive. The AI's proposal. The crew gathered on the bridge, weapons within reach, eyes locked on the central command console, where streams of data flowed across the screens. The AI spoke again, its voice smooth but layered, as if thousands of fragmented voices had been stitched together. You have restored this vessel, state your intent. Orin stepped forward. We're going to use this ship to fight the Empire. A long pause. Then, acknowledged. This vessel was built for war, but your directive is inefficient. A single warship cannot challenge an empire. Rhea muttered under her breath. Great, the ship thinks we're idiots. Orin's fists clenched. We'll make it work. We built you from wreckage. We'll build an entire fleet if we have to. For the first time, the AI's tone changed. It almost sounded amused, optimistic, uncalculated, but not without merit. A pulse of energy rippled through the ship's systems. This vessel has untapped potential. However, critical systems remain inactive. Full combat effectiveness is currently at 17%. Orin frowned. And how do we fix that? Another pause. Then, the ship's monitors lit up, revealing a star map. It displayed the wreckage field, then zoomed outward, marking locations deep in Imperial territory. There are resources within reach, hidden caches, lost technology, and weapons abandoned by war. Recover them. Upgrade this vessel. Then, and only then, will your mission be viable. Orin turned to his crew. Rhea studied the map. These locations, some of them are near old battlefield sites. Others are deep in Terran-controlled space. If we go after this stuff, we're gonna have to fight for it. Tark crossed his arms. We knew this wasn't going to be easy. Orin nodded. We start scavenging, we start raiding, we get the Revenant up to full power. The AI's golden veins pulsed brighter. Then I will assist. The stronger this vessel becomes, the greater our chances of survival. Orin narrowed his eyes. We? Yes, Commander Voss. This is no longer just your war. The ship's engines hummed, deeper, and the screens flickered as new battle plans, ship schematics, and tactical projections appeared. It is mine as well. The first upgrade mission. The crew's first target was an abandoned weapons station, once a research facility, now just another derelict husk floating in the void. The Revenant moved out for the first time, its engines roaring, as it left the wreckage field behind. For the first time in years, the ship was awake, moving, hunting, but they weren't the only ones watching. Unknown to Orin and his crew, a Terran scout vessel had detected their movements, and soon, the Empire would know the Revenant had returned. The ultimate battleship takes shape. The hunt begins. The Revenant moved through the void like a predator stalking prey. For the first time in years, its engines roared, its systems flickered to life, and its hull, still scarred and battered, hummed, with potential. But it wasn't complete. It wasn't ready to fight the Empire. Not yet. That's why they were here. Approaching an abandoned weapons station, one of the last known locations marked on the AI's tactical map. Orin Voss stood on the command deck, arms crossed, eyes locked on the distant silhouette of the derelict facility. "What's inside?" Tark asked, leaning against a rusted console. Rhea pulled up the old station schematics. If we're lucky, high-yield energy weapons, modular railgun turrets, maybe even some prototype tech the Empire never got around to testing. Milo grinned. And, if we're not lucky, Rhea sighed, then the place is probably crawling with old security drones and automated defenses that'll turn us into scrap. Milo's grin widened. So, a normal day then? Ghosts of the past. They approached the station cautiously. It floated in silence, orbiting a dead moon, its structure pockmarked with the scars of past battles. But something felt off. The docking bay. Doors were open as if inviting them inside. Rhea frowned. That's not normal. Orin didn't like it, but they had no choice. We go in fast. Get what we need. Get out. The boarding team consisted of Orin, Rhea, Tark, and Milo, each armed and ready for whatever was inside. The Revenant's AI, silent since their last conversation, spoke as they prepared. Proceed with caution. There is a 72% probability that hostile entities remain inside. Orin exhaled. Good to know. Then they stepped into the dark. The first encounter, inside. The station was dead and cold, the air stale, lights flickering, metal walls lined with rust and decay. But then, a noise. Low mechanical whine echoed through the halls. Then another. Rhea's grip tightened on her plasma rifle. Yeah, I don't like that. The first drone appeared from the shadows, its frame sleek, blackened, and covered in battle scars. Its optical sensors flared red. Orin barely had time to yell a warning before it opened fire. Blaster rounds slammed into the metal walls, sparks flying. The crew scattered, taking cover. Milo, Orin barked. On it. Milo lobbed an EMP grenade, the pulse short-circuiting the drone instantly. It collapsed, twitching, its optics flickering before going dark. But then, the hallway lights surged and more red optics flickered to life in the darkness, fighting for the prize. The station's defense system had reactivated. Drones swarmed. Gunfire roared. The air filled with the acrid scent of burnt circuits and scorched metal. Orin's team fought through the facility, pushing toward the station's core, the weapons vault. Every room was a battlefield. Tark held the line, dual plasma pistols firing, in rapid succession, taking down drones one by one. Rhea hacked into an access panel, disabling automated turrets before they could turn them into dust. Milo, laughing like a madman, kept throwing explosives, turning tight corridors into firestorms of shrapnel and smoke. Finally, they reached it. The vault. And inside, Oren's breath caught. It wasn't just weapons inside this place. It was a prototype experimental railgun, one unlike anything they'd ever seen, a weapon designed not for Imperial warships, but for planetary destruction, the ultimate upgrade. This thing, Rhea whispered, running her hands over the weapon's sleek, untouched metal. It's not just a railgun, it's a siege cannon. This thing could take out capital ships in one shot. Oren's mind raced. Can we install it? Rhea grinned. Oh, we're definitely installing it. The AI's voice returned. The weapon is compatible. Modifications required. Estimated completion time, 6 hours. Oren turned to the others. Then let's move. The Empire arrives. They barely had time to start. Installing the railgun when the proximity alarms blared. Tark cursed, pulling up the sensor feed. We've got a problem. Oren looked at the screen. A fleet of Imperial warships had arrived and they were coming straight for them. The Empire had found them, and now they were coming to finish what they started. Oren tightened his fists. They had two choices: run or fight. He looked at the railgun half installed, its targeting system still offline. Then at his crew, then at the enemy fleet, and he made his choice. Get that railgun online. We're about to test our new ship the hard way. The Revenant turned. Engines, roaring, heading straight for the Imperial fleet. Because today, they weren't running, they were fighting. The Empire strikes first. The trap is sprung. The Revenant wasn't ready for this fight. Not yet. Its new siege railgun was only half installed, its targeting systems offline, and its shields barely functioning. And yet, the Empire had come. 5 warships. 3 escort frigates built for speed and suppression. 1 battlecruiser, armed with heavy cannons and a full fighter squadron. And at the center of them all, a dreadnought, a leviathan of war. Oren stood on the bridge, staring at the incoming fleet. His crew moved around him, preparing for battle. Tark gritted his teeth. We are so outgunned right now. Milo loaded another charge into the secondary cannons, so what? Since when do we do things the smart way? Rhea muttered under her breath as she patched into the ship's weapon systems. If we fire this railgun before it's calibrated, it might just tear the ship apart. Oren exhaled. Then let's make sure we only have to fire it once. The Revenant's thrusters ignited, surging forward into battle. The Empire thought they had come to wipe out scavengers. They had no idea what they were walking into. The first shots. The Imperial frigates struck first, long-range plasma lances, cutting through space, slamming into the Revenant's weakened hull. The ship shook violently, sparks flying from the control panels. Shields at 28%. The AI reported. Oren gritted his teeth. Return fire. Tark and Milo activated the ship's primary railguns, launching a barrage of high-velocity slugs at the lead frigate. The rounds pierced its hull, sending it into a spiraling explosion. 1 ship down, 4 to go. Dogfight in the debris. The Imperial battlecruiser deployed fighters, sleek interceptors that weaved through the wreckage, strafing the Revenant with high-speed pulse cannons. The bridge shook violently as the ship took another hit. We need to lose those fighters. Oren barked. Rhea's fingers flew across the console. Hang on. She rerouted power to the secondary thrusters, sending the Revenant into a barrel roll through the wreckage field. The fighters followed, right into the trap. Milo triggered the ship's minefield, detonating a cluster of high explosive charges hidden in the wreckage. Fire and shrapnel filled the void. 3 fighters were incinerated instantly. 2 more tried to pull up, too late. Their wings clipped broken hulls, sending them careening into the wreckage. Only one fighter escaped. But by then, it was too late. The Revenant had cleared the battlefield. Now, it was time to face the real threat. The dreadnought moves, and the Imperial dreadnought finally advanced, its massive silhouette blocking out the stars, its weapons powered up, plasma turrets locking onto the Revenant. The AI's voice echoed through the bridge. "Warning! Primary enemy vessel preparing to fire." Oren's jaw clenched. "How much time until our railgun is ready?" Rhea checked the systems. "Another 2 minutes." They didn't have 2 minutes. The dreadnought's main cannons fired, taking the key. Hit the first plasma round slammed into the Revenant's hull, tearing through the outer plating. A shockwave sent the crew staggering, alarms blaring across the ship. "Hull integrity at 63%, the AI warned. The second shot followed. Oren barely had time to react. Divert all power to the forward shields. The Revenant's energy field flared, absorbing the brunt of the blast, but the ship still shook violently. Rhea yelped as sparks exploded from her console. This ship wasn't built for this kind of punishment. Tark slammed a fist against the console. "Then we finish this. Now." The Revenant fires back. Oren turned to Rhea. "Is the railgun ready?" She checked the final diagnostics. "It's uncalibrated, but it'll fire." Oren grinned. "Then fire it." Rhea hit the final command. The Revenant's experimental siege railgun began to glow, a brilliant blue-white light surging down its barrel as its capacitors overloaded. The AI's voice echoed through the ship. "Firing solution locked. Initiating primary weapon discharge." Then, the Revenant fired. The kill shot. The railgun round ripped through space, a hypervelocity projectile moving faster than anything the Empire had ever seen. It struck the Imperial dreadnought dead center. The ship's shield shattered instantly. The projectile tore through its armor, piercing deck after deck, ripping through the reactor core. For a brief moment, the dreadnought hung in space motionless. Then, it exploded. A brilliant fireball erupted in the void, sending shockwaves through the wreckage field. The remaining Imperial frigates hesitated, then they fled. The Revenant had won. A ghost in the void. The Revenant had vanished. The Empire scoured the wreckage field, searching for survivors, debris, or even a trace of its escape path. But they found nothing. No signals. No distress beacons. Only silence. The warship they thought was dead had risen from the grave, destroyed a dreadnought, and then disappeared. Whispers spread across the galaxy, among the rebels, among the scavengers, even within the Empire itself. A phantom ship, a legend reborn, a ghost in the void that strikes without warning. The Revenant was no longer just a ship. It was a symbol, and symbols were dangerous. A war brewing in the shadows. Oren stood on the bridge, staring at the star map, as the Revenant drifted through a distant nebula. The battle had taken its toll. Hull, fractures, overloaded circuits. The railgun's firing mechanism nearly burned out. They had won, but barely. "We need repairs," Rhea said, arms crossed, "and we need them fast." Tark leaned back against the weapons console. "And a fleet. One ship. Isn't gonna win this war, Captain," Oren exhaled, nodding. "Then we find allies." The Revenant had proven one thing. The Empire wasn't invincible. Now they needed to build something bigger. The call to arms across the galaxy, word spread. The Empire's undefeated fleet had suffered a humiliating loss, and that meant one thing. Hope that old rebel factions took notice. Survivors from past battles came out of hiding. Even Imperial defectors, tired of serving under an iron fist, began seeking them out. The Revenant had become a rallying cry. We can fight, we can win, and we're not alone. The first meeting Oren's crew arrived at a hidden outpost deep in neutral space, where remnants of old resistance groups still operated in the shadows. The station was crude, a floating city of scrap and stolen Imperial tech, home to smugglers, ex-soldiers, and outlaws who had never surrendered. As they docked, Rhea frowned. "Are you sure about this, Oren?" He nodded. "They need to see us. They need to see that the Empire can bleed." And so, for the first time, the Revenant's crew walked openly among the scattered survivors of the war. Faces turned, eyes widened, and then whispers. "It's them. That's the crew that took down a dreadnought. The Revenant is real." Oren stepped forward, standing in front of a gathered crowd of fighters, captains, and leaders of the resistance. He spoke simply. "The Empire left us for dead. They crushed our fleets, took our homes, forced us into hiding. But they made a mistake." He let his words linger, the silence heavy. "They left wreckage behind. And from that wreckage we built something greater. They think they've won. That we are broken. That we will never rise again." He took a breath. "They are wrong. The Revenant is proof that we can fight. Now we need more ships, more people, more weapons. Because the Empire will come back. And next time, we will be ready." The silence broke, not with words, but with cheers. The Revenant had become a legend. Now, it was becoming a movement. The Empire's response. The Empire was not blind. They had seen the reports, the whispers. And most of all, they had seen fear creeping into their own ranks. A rebel ship, rebuilt from ruins, had challenged their rule. And worse, survived. Inside the heart of the Imperial capital, a high-ranking officer stared at the holographic battle report. Commander Dane Castor. Cold, ruthless, loyal to the Empire. His orders were simple. Find the Revenant. Crush this rebellion before it spreads. And this time, leave nothing behind. The Revenant prepares for war. Back at the rebel outpost, the Revenant was being transformed. New armor plating reinforced its battered hull. New weapons were scavenged and installed. The railgun, now fully operational, was recalibrated for maximum efficiency. The ship was evolving, and so was its AI. The golden veins in the ship's framework glowed brighter. The AI's voice, once purely mechanical, now had an edge of something else, something aware. "You are gathering allies," it said. "You are building a fleet. And soon, they will come for you." Oren stood in the center of the bridge, watching the war preparations unfold. He knew what was coming, and for the first time in a long time, he welcomed it. Let them come. We'll show them what happens when they leave us for dead. The Revenant's engines burned bright, casting a golden glow across the station. It was no longer just a ship, no longer just a legend. It was the beginning of a war, and the Empire had no idea what was coming. The final battle begins. Reckoning in the stars, the Revenant had disappeared into legend. But legends don't stay hidden forever. And now, the Empire was coming. From the farthest reaches of the galaxy, an armada was gathering. 17 warships. 3 dreadnoughts. A fleet of strike cruisers and fighter squadrons. The Empire was sending everything they had. Commander Dane Castor stood aboard the flagship Eclipse, eyes locked on the star map displaying the Revenant's last known location. "The rebels think they can rise again." His voice was calm but filled with cold certainty. "They will learn what it means to defy the Empire." He turned to his fleet commanders. "Find them. Burn them out of the sky." The hunt was over. The final battle had begun. The trap is set. On the other side of the galaxy, Orrin Voss already knew what was coming. From the moment they struck back, from the moment they defied the Empire and survived, this battle was inevitable, and so, they prepared. The Revenant was no longer alone. They had spent months gathering allies, building a fleet of scavenged warships, defectors, and rogue captains willing to fight. It wasn't a fleet of order. It wasn't a fleet of power. It was a fleet of survivors, and it was ready. "They think we're hiding," Orrin said, standing before his gathered captains. "They think we'll run." His gaze swept over them. They are wrong. Battle over the wastelands. The Empire's armada arrived in a remote sector where the Revenant had last been detected. They expected a chase. Instead, they found a fleet waiting for them. An explosion ripped through the void before the battle even began. A pre-placed mine detonating beneath the lead Imperial cruiser, and then the Revenant struck. It emerged from the wreckage field like a ghost, its siege railgun charging, golden veins pulsing with energy, firing solution locked. The railgun roared. A hypervelocity round tore through the void, striking the first Imperial dreadnought. A direct hit. The ship didn't explode immediately. Instead, it broke apart, its hull splitting from the force of the impact, fire and debris spilling into space. The Empire realized their mistake. This was not a scattered group of rebels. This was not a fleeing enemy. This was a war, a fight to the death. The Imperial fleet unleashed hell. Cruisers fired plasma volleys, their cannons heating the void with molten destruction. Fighter squadrons swarmed, engaging the rebel fleet in chaotic dogfights. The Revenant led the charge, weaving through enemy fire, returning shot for shot. Milo maneuvered the ship's secondary cannons, taking down fighters and disabling enemy engines. Rhea rerouted power, keeping the shields alive as long as possible. Tark led the strike teams, boarding an enemy battleship mid-fight, taking the fight inside. For every ship the Empire destroyed, the rebels took 2 in return. But it wasn't enough. The Empire still had more ships, more firepower, and the Revenant was running out of time. The final stand shields at 12%, the AI warned. Orrin knew what that meant. They had 1 shot left. The Revenant's railgun was overheating, its power reserves almost depleted, and the final Imperial dreadnought was moving in for the kill. Orrin turned to his crew. "We end this now." They rerouted every ounce of power into the railgun, every system, every last spark of energy. The ship groaned, its structure shaking violently, alarm screaming through the bridge. The AI's voice flickered. Warning, structural integrity at critical levels. Orrin clenched his fists. Fire. The Revenant's railgun fired one last time. A single golden beam of destruction tore through space and pierced the heart of the Empire's last dreadnought. The flagship exploded, its debris scattering into the void. The Empire's fleet broke. They had lost. Victory at a cost. The battle was over. The Empire's fleet was crippled. The Revenant had won. But at a price. The ship was barely holding together, its engines failing, its hull cracked. Orrin stood on the bridge, staring at the wreckage. Around them, they had done the impossible, and now they had to decide what came next. Tark turned to him, voice hoarse. "So, what now?" Orrin looked at the Revenant, scarred, battered, but alive. He exhaled. "Now, we rebuild. The end, or the beginning." The Revenant was no longer just a battleship, it was a legend, a symbol of rebellion. And though the Empire had been dealt a devastating blow, it was not defeated. Not yet. Orrin knew they would return, But this time, the rebels would be ready, because from the ashes of war, they had forged something stronger, something unstoppable. The Revenant turned away from the battlefield, its engines roaring one last time. As it vanished into the void, its legend grew. Some say it was never seen again. Others say it waits, hidden in the darkness, watching, preparing. But one thing was certain. The Empire would never forget the day they faced the Revenant, and the galaxy would never be the same again.